When I was around 19 years old, I became completely obsessed with productivity. I wanted to get ahead. I wanted to stop wasting time. I wanted to be one of those people who woke up at 5 a.m., had a journaling practice, a morning routine, a color coded calendar, and somehow still had the time to read 40 books a year. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I watched productivity videos, I read the books, I downloaded the apps, I tried the systems, I rearranged my schedule like 6 different times, and for years I genuinely believed that if I just consumed enough of this stuff, eventually it would click and I would transform into some kind of hyper efficient human being. In fact, there's actually a joke that goes around in productivity circles when someone drops a video and the top comment is always something like, saving this to watch later. And the reason that's funny is because it's painfully accurate. Productivity content has somehow become the thing we procrastinate with. We convince ourselves that watching one more video or reading one more chapter is the same as actually doing the work. But it isn't. But here's the thing. I'm not making this video to add to the pile. I'm making this because after years of consuming all of that stuff, I realized that almost everything useful about productivity can be reduced down to two principles. Not 10, not a whole system, just two things. And those two things account for the majority of the results. If you can give me until the end of this video, I genuinely think you won't need another productivity video after this one. And that realization started with something called the Pareto principle. So, the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule is this idea that roughly 80% of your results come from 20% of your causes. And yes, it shows up everywhere once you start looking for it. For example, in school, most of your grade doesn't come from understanding every single thing in the textbook. It comes from really locking in on a handful of core concepts that the course actually revolves around. The students who do well aren't always the ones who study the most. In fact, they're often the ones who figured out which 20% of the material was worth 80% of the exam. It is also the same thing in business. For example, like most companies, if they're being honest, get the majority of their revenue from a relatively small group of customers. Not from everyone equally, from a few key relationships that just keep producing. The rest of the customer base matters, sure, but the leverage is just concentrated in a small percentage. Fitness is also the same way. You don't need 47 different supplements and, a 6 day split and a cold plunge and a specific, sleep protocol to see the results. Most of the progress comes from a few things done consistently. Lift heavy enough, eat enough protein, sleep, show up. In fact, that's most of it. Everything else is optimizing around the edges. Even the books work this way. You can read a 300-page book and realistically walk away with maybe 3 or 4 ideas that actually change something in your life. And the rest of it is context and repetition and filler. The value is, in fact, concentrated. And when I apply this lens to productivity specifically, something became really obvious to me. I wasn't missing techniques, I wasn't missing systems. In fact, I wasn't missing apps or frameworks or even morning routines. I had all of that. What I was missing was a clear understanding of what percentage, that small percentage of things, actually drove the results. Most people chasing productivity are out there searching for the remaining 20%. The hacks, the optimizations, those little dirty tricks, and they haven't even fully applied the foundational 20% they already know. The stuff that actually moves the needle. After years of going through all of this, I think the foundational 20% comes down to two principles. Just two. And if you actually internalize them, most of the other stuff takes care of itself. So the first principle is almost embarrassingly simple, and I think that's actually why most people overlook it. The biggest obstacle to being productive isn't doing the work, it's actually starting the work. That's it. That's the whole thing. And I know that sounds like something you'd read on a motivational poster in a school hallway, but stay with me because I don't think that most people actually want to internalize this. Because if they did, they'd stop doing what almost everyone does, which is waiting. Waiting to feel motivated, waiting to feel ready, waiting for the right mood to show up before they open the textbook or sit down at the desk or lace up their shoes. And the problem with that approach is that motivation is one of the most unreliable things in the world. It shows up when it wants to, it disappears without warning, and if your entire productivity system depends on the feeling, like doing the work before you do it, you're going to have a very inconsistent relationship with getting things done. There is a concept in physics called the Newton's first law. An object at rest stays at rest, an object in motion always stays in motion. And I think this applies to human behavior and more accurately than most people realize. Think about pushing a boulder, a giant heavy boulder sitting completely still. The hardest part of the whole process isn't keeping it moving, it's getting it to move at all. That initial push requires everything you have, but once it started rolling, the momentum does a lot of work for you. That's exactly how tasks feel. Opening the textbook is harder than studying once you're already studying. Sitting down to write is harder than continuing once you've already started. Putting on your shoes and walking out the door is harder than finishing the workout once you're already in the gym. The resistance lives almost entirely at the beginning. And what I've found in my own life is that most of the days when I thought I lacked motivation, what I actually lacked was movement. I was sitting still, waiting for the feeling to arrive that would carry me into action. But actually, I realized that it works the other way around. You don't wait for motivation to start. You start so that the motivation has a reason to show up. Action creates momentum, and that momentum creates motivation. It's not the other way around. And so the first principle is just this: start before you feel ready. Close the YouTube video, open the thing that you've been putting off, and do 5 minutes of it. Just five. But here's where most people get tripped up next. Because starting is one thing, actually focusing on the right thing to work on, well, that's a whole another problem. So you've started, the boulder is moving, but here's where the second principle comes in. And honestly, this one might be even more important than the first. Productivity isn't just starting, it's about what happens after you start. It's about whether you can actually stay present with the thing you're doing long enough for it to amount to something. And I think the simplest way to frame this is like a formula. Productivity is equals to focus multiplied by time. And that multiplication sign actually matters. Because think about this: if your focus is slow, it doesn't matter how many hours you put in. You're multiplying it by a small number. So the output, the productivity, stays small. Most people feel unproductive, think that they have a time problem. They feel like there aren't enough hours in a day. And look, I know sometimes that's true, but more often than not, if you actually audit how your time is being spent, the problem isn't the hours, it's the attention. It's the fact that those hours are being constantly interrupted, diluted, and fractured into tiny pieces that never add up to anything meaningful. And the culprits are obvious. Notifications going off every few minutes, social media sitting one tap away, the habit of checking your phone between every task, sometimes even mid task, the constant low grade awareness that something somewhere might need your attention. All of this creates an environment where deep, sustained focus becomes almost impossible to maintain. And here's the thing about multitasking that people really need to understand: you're not actually doing two things at once. Actually, your brain can't do that. What you're doing is switching your attention back and forth between things very quickly. And every single switch carries a cost. There's actually a mental task on each transition. It takes time, right, and energy to fully re engage with something after you've pulled away from it. So if you're switching constantly, you're paying the tax over and over again without ever really getting into the work. Some of my most productive days haven't been the longest ones. They haven't been the days where I sat at my desk for 10 hours straight, but rather they've been the days where I blocked out 2 or 3 hours, put my phone in the other room, closed every unnecessary tab, and just did the work without any interruption. That's it. And those few focused hours would consistently outperform entire distracted days. Here's what I find kind of funny when I look back at the productivity content I consumed over the years. Almost all of it, when you strip away the branding and the frameworks and the catchy names, was trying to solve one of two problems. One, either it is trying to answer the question of how do I get myself to start, or it was trying to answer the question of how do I stay focused once I've started. That's it. Those are the two problems. And the entire productivity industry, the books, the apps, the YouTube channels, YouTube videos, the online articles, all of it is essentially just different people offering different packaging around the same solutions. Think about it. Morning routines exist to solve the starting problem. If you build a consistent routine, you remove the decision of whether to begin. The routine makes the decision for you. You wake up, you follow the sequence, and you're ready in motion before your brain has a chance to negotiate with you. Time blocking exists to solve the focus problem. You assign specific tasks to specific windows of time and protect those windows from any interruption. It's a system of creating the conditions where real attention is possible. Goal setting frameworks like SMART goals are mostly about clarifying what's worth starting in the first place, so you're not wasting your focus on the wrong things. Even productivity apps at their core are either helping you figure out what to do next, which is the starting problem, or helping you stay on track while you're doing it, which is a focus problem. Of course, the details change depending on who's teaching it and what they're selling, but the fundamentals stay exactly the same every time across every system I've ever looked at. And once you see that, you realize you don't need to keep searching. You don't need the next app or the next framework or the next video. You need to get better at starting, and you need to get better at staying present once you do. Everything else is just noise around those two things. And so I want to bring this back to where we started: the books, the apps, the videos, the systems, all those endless search for a better way to manage my time and my energy and my output. Years of genuinely believing that the answer was somewhere out there, and if I just consumed enough of the right content, it would eventually transform me into a productive person I was trying to become. And after all that, here's what I actually found. Productivity is much simpler than the internet wants you to believe. Not easy. Simple. And there's a real difference between those two things. Start before you feel motivated. That's the first one. Don't wait for the mood to show up. Don't wait until you're ready or maybe inspired to be in the zone. Push the boulder. Accept that the first few minutes are going to feel like resistance. And yet do it anyway, because once you start moving, the whole thing changes. And when you're moving, actually protect that momentum. Close the tabs, put the phone down, stop letting every notification and every random impulse pull you out of the thing that you're trying to do. One focused hour is worth more than a whole scattered day, and the more you practice it, the more obvious that becomes. That's it. Two things. That's most of it. You probably don't need another productivity video after this one. You don't need another app, another system, another framework, even another book promising to revolutionize the way you work. You already know enough, and most people do. In fact, the gap isn't knowledge, it's actually application. So, yeah, push the boulder, and once it starts moving, protect the focus long enough for it to go somewhere. And that's the whole thing. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and you learned something from it. If you liked the video, please hit the thumbs up button. If you don't like the video, well, hit the thumbs up anyway. It helps this channel grow. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I see you guys soon. Bye.